Hello, all. It is Thursday noon, and we're hanging out with the one and only Mark Sleboda. Let's talk. All right, we're hanging out with Mark Sleboda. Oh, by the way, I almost forgot the most important website that you could possibly ever go to in your little life, and
I
it is,
don't know about that, but
and it is right here. Oh, there's no question, and it is blank, but I think it's coming up. Doggone it! Come on, it's very, very slow. It's not up yet. I think the CIA is deliberately blocking it. It's taken a long time to pop up, and I do not trust it. It's supposed to be boosty.to/ the real politique. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. What the hell? Yeah, it's not liking it. There we go. We have Houston. We have contact. Let's try it again. All right. Mark Sleboda is doing all kinds of good work. And if you want to find out what he's doing and be a part of it, looky here. Boosty.to/ the real politique with Mark Sleboda. Hey, we're shooting for 200 subscribers and we're only up to 183, but that's okay. We're moving fast and we're going to get up to 200 subscribers hopefully within the next week or so. Things are moving. And guess what? You got Q&A. Mark, tell everybody what kind of stuff they can enjoy on your Boosty page.
yeah, if you can't suffer enough with me, then come here on Boosty. It is basically a sanctions-proof Patreon, but sanctions-proof, and lots of exclusive content. I do an in focus video, a weekly Q&A, and a weekend review just for subscribers every week. Plus, you can get interviews with me and a private Discord channel and everything else.
Oh, that's so awesome. So everybody, boosty.to, we're up to 183. Let's make it. And you can, of course, donate. You can subscribe. So we're up to 183 subscribers. Let us push quickly to get to 200. All right, Mark Sleboda, let's figure out what the heck's going on out here. And let's start with this. Let's start with it. Let's start with something that I find interesting, and I want to hear your thoughts from Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
So, a Russian general recently shared a very interesting map in which some areas that had been in great question as to whether they may end up in the Russian hands may not be in such great question anymore. He's like a man after my own heart, because I thought to myself, if I were the Russians, anything that I wanted, I'd take it now. And that would end up with my little feet in Transnistria all the way up the coast. I wouldn't leave them Odessa so they could load bad things on it and launch attacks. None of that. That's just me. But it looks like there are like minds in Russia. Your thoughts, Mark Sleboda?
Yeah. In the last week, the commander, commander in chief of the special military operation, Gerasimov, addressed. There was a meeting of the general staff, and there was a very thorough update and briefing on the special military operation. And in the aftermath of that, Gerasimov also did an interview in an office. And there was a map on the wall behind of Ukraine, of the area of the special military operation. And it showed in the southern half, it showed not only Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, but then a little bit on the other side of the Dnieper, it also showed Nikolaev and Odessa as Russian territory. Now, there's, of course, this caused an insane amount of outrage and fury in the Kiev regime and its interlocutors, on the Western social media and so forth. Myself, as to whether this is a definitive plan, right? Or a bit of trolling on behalf of the Russian brass. I think it falls somewhere in the middle. Um, I'm trying to think of the name. It's been such a long time. There's that old baseball movie in the United States. It's been done a few times, where the batter comes up to the plate and points up high in the distance, right, where he's going to hit the ball, right? And that, I think, is essentially what the Russian military was doing there, in aspiration, trolling, but also a bit of aspiration. Now, I have to say, do not expect that anytime soon, because there are formidable obstacles on the way to getting there, namely a contested crossing in the south, a contesting crossing of the Dnieper, Kherson City, Nikolaev, and then Odessa. That's difficult, right? An amphibious landing at Odessa, right, to take the city from the beaches. That's not in the cards, right? I don't believe that Russia really has that kind of amphibious landings. Are notoriously hard. I mean, Normandy can attest to that, and Russia has done everything so far in this conflict to minimize their casualties, right? I mean, that's the war of attrition. So I think right now, while it is an aspiration, it is still largely believed that that is something that would come in basically surrender terms, right? Rather than an actual storming of Odessa, right? First of all, it's a Russian city. It's founded by Catherine the Great. There's a Russian, very strong Russian presence in Odessa. I don't think that Russia wants to destroy Odessa in order to take it, like it has had to do with, unfortunately, so many other places in Donbass and elsewhere. I think they would prefer to achieve it diplomatically as part of a settlement, basically surrender terms. But of course, we're still a far way from that too.
Another cut it off, like, you know what I mean? Couldn't they just like take out, completely decapitate, for the most part, the military of Ukraine, and once their military is really so weak that things are falling apart, you know what I mean? Cut it off and then say, hey, guys, you know what I mean? Are you going to fight to the last man? I mean, at some point when things fall, that's the last thing you move on. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's possible. In World War II, when Russia had to recover Odessa from the Nazis, they did not attempt. They went north through Kiev and then down through the south. It was considered a lot smarter to do it that way. And one way or another, yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to be all going all the way up to Kiev. There are other places to make a crossing of the Dnieper, assuming, of course, that at some point the Kiev regime doesn't blow up the bridges, trying to shall we say, retreat and close the way off behind them. But we're a long way from that yet.
Yeah.
I'll simply say that. I myself, and in my black, cold Russian heart of hearts, I have some distant relatives in Odessa, the relatives of my wife, right? I myself would not feel that the special military operation was truly complete unless it ended with Odessa, back in Russian hands. But there are, at a state level, there are more important security concerns, like Ukraine not in NATO, NATO not in Ukraine, right? Denazification, those sorts of things. So there are other concerns, but quite obviously, the Russian brass is thinking about it.
Well, speaking of denazification, there was a most unfortunate incident where a scumbag by the name of Andre Perubia had a most unfortunate turn of events. perhaps you might want to comment. That's my comment. Perhaps you might want to comment on it, Mark.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know who Andrei Parubi is, if any one person is singularly responsible for more than anyone else, right? No one is singularly responsible, more than anyone else for the last everything that's happened since 2014, since the Maidan Putsch and everything that's happened since, right? I think probably Victoria Nuland in the US and Andrei Parubi in Ukraine would be at the very top of that list. Andrei Parubi, he's not a neo-Nazi. There's nothing neo about him. He is an old school Nazi, a Banderite fascist. He was the founder, West Ukraine from Lvov. He's the founder originally of the Social National Party of Ukraine, right? If you switch National Socialist around and put one in front of the other, they'll never figure out what this is all about, right? I mean, that's the game, right? They were an anti-Semitic, anti-leftist, anti-Russian, Nazi party. There's no question. I mean, take a look at the pictures, right? With the torch lit and the brown shirt suits and everything like that. Clearly, they also had a violent paramilitary wing, the Patriots of Ukraine. And then eventually that party was rolled in an attempt to slightly better rebrand it into what would become known as the Sleboda Party, which was the largest constituent part of the protesters / insurgents on the Maidan. And it's amazing. If you take a look back, right, in the European Parliament, in a resolution on the situation in Ukraine, exactly 1 year before the Maidan, passed a resolution that it included a bit saying that the Sleboda Party were ultra-nationalists, read Banderite fascists, they were anti-Semitic, they were anti-this, they were anti-that, and that no party or person who values freedom and democracy in Ukraine should in any way associate with them. It's right there. It's in the EU itself said that in a resolution. Yet 1 year later, EU of technocrats and EU member state leaders were on the stage, right, with Parubi, with Tyagnybok, who co-founded Sleboda with him, and cheerleading on, calling, hand in hand with these people, calling for the overthrow of the Ukrainian government because geopolitics, right? Because Yanukovych dared to say no to their EU association agreement, the neoliberal shock therapy diktat, or really, he didn't even say no. He said, well, no, not now, not under those terms. We'd really like to do it, but those are really bad terms, right? That's what he said. But that was it. And they were perfectly willing to use Nazis, right? I mean, when I say Nazis, Parubi in 2018, in a public, interview, on a TV interview, it's out there, he said that he thought that the greatest Democrat in history was Adolf Hitler. I mean, you just can't. I mean, but they still attempt to whitewash him. So he became the commandant of the quote-unquote self-defense forces of the Maidan, right? Which means the brown shirts. He led the violent brown shirts on the Maidan, the nascent battalions, right? That would then form the neo-Nazi battalions of Ukraine. And at the very end, this shooting from unknown people, which was painted as the Berkut, like the SWAT forces of the Ukrainian government's military, shot both protesters and police. But this has been well debunked, and it's been Canadian researchers have done extensive evidence. The shots rang out from the Hotel Ukraine, right? That was under the control of who? Parubi and his brown shirts. And there's a video I mean, it's on my own page there on a video I did on Perubi on Monday for you lucky subscribers out there to me. It's of him and his people in full black ski masks, military, paramilitary gear, walking out of the hotel Ukraine, after all this was over, with these long cases in their hand that are quite obviously sniper rifles. And someone says to them, "Hey, are those guns? Are those sniper rifles?" And they go, "No, those are tubes. Those are our musical instruments. We're musicians," right? It was not even remotely believable. So he was responsible for the false flag that created the claim of political emergency that allowed the overthrow of the Ukrainian government, the legitimate, democratically elected, however flawed Ukrainian government that said no to the EU and stood in the way of these Banderite fascists. He then became the head of the Security and Defense Council of the new regime. He led the formation of the battalions, the far right, the Banderite fascist battalions, like Pravi sector, like Aidar, like all of these, when the Carpathia siege, when the Ukrainian military at first was not responsive to the overthrow of this government. They're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Who are these people, right? Why would we take orders from them? And in fact, 75% of the Navy defected to Russia. 75% and that's according to Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, by the way. Those numbers come from them. They formed the battalions to begin the war against the people on Donbass. And he ordered the beginning of the artillery shelling of Donetsk city, right, of the Donbass, that would go on for the next 10 years. He also ordered the movement of the battalions to Odessa to tamp down the anti-Maidan protests that were taking place there, where those protesters were then chased by the brown shirts into the trade union building in Odessa. And the building was lit on fire with Molotov cocktails, and the majority of the people inside were killed either from fire, smoke, or they were shot and beat to death trying to escape the building. And he was, responsible for ordering that became known as the Odessa massacre. And then he would become a member of the new regime's Rada, their parliament, and even the speaker of the Rada, where this Nazi, right, this Banderite fascist who said that, Adolf Hitler, greatest Democrat in history, he was welcomed and lauded and feted and backslapped by Western politicians, showing what obscene whores they all are, what absolute, everything they say about values and their posturing for moral superiority. They literally stood on stage with a Nazi. Justin Trudeau met him, members of Congress met him. Of course, there's plenty of pictures of U.S. ambassador to Ukraine at the time, Jeffrey Piat, who even lamented the loss of his good friend in the aftermath of this, and Vicky Newland with him. So this guy, I mean, he needed to be removed. My regret, I have some regrets about his killing. I wish the Russian government had done it. I'm really disappointed by finding out that it wasn't, because on one hand, the Kiev regime has obviously intensified their dirty war. I mean, they've assassinated hundreds, probably more than 1,000 at this point, right? Officials, leaders, activists in East Ukraine, anyone, right, that opposes their vision of a Banderite fascist Ukraine, right? They've assassinated again and again and again. Car bombings, terrorist bombings, shootings, hundreds. And like I said, over 1,000, and then increasingly in Russia as well, including the assassination of civilians like Daria Dugina and others. Particularly with recent assassinations of Russian generals, the head of the Russian Defense against chemical, biological, and radiological attacks. I had hoped that Russia had enough and was saying, all right, kids, gloves off. You want to play this game, quid pro quo. And as well, right, if Russia is serious about denazification, debanderization, well, what better place to start than number one, right? I mean, if there is a godfather, a modern day godfather of the Banderites, that was Andrei Perubi. So the fact that it turns out, all right, from the testimony of the person they caught, he says he's a resident of Lvov who saw him on a regular basis, a 52-year-old local man whose son was declared missing but killed in Bakhmut, and the Ukrainian government, maintained the fiction and refused to give him anything, and he came to blame them for his son's death. And he said this was his personal act of revenge against the regime, against the regime in Kiev. And the only thing he wants now, which is never going to happen, is to be traded as in a prisoner of war exchange to Russia, not because he wants to join Russia per se, but so that they can help find his son's body. Right? This is entirely a personal grievance. And think how many other Ukrainians, fathers, brothers, mother, are potentially vigilantes like that, right? Wanting revenge against these people that killed us. And not just political figures, right? Think of all of the members of the press gangs, right? The TCC, the conscription gangs, those people, I would not, bet much for them if the regime falls, right? Or it even starts crumbling in a serious way. So, in final summation of the all too timely death of Andrei Perubi, I will simply give him the parting epithet: rot in hell, Andrei Perubi, rot in hell.
Well, I used to always say jokingly, well, they always talk about somebody's untimely demise. Well, there must be some such thing as a timely demise. I have come to the conclusion now that there is, in fact, such thing as a timely demise.
Well, it's untimely in that it should have happened a long time ago.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I guess in theory, it's still an untimely demise. But the thing about it is this, too. It's like the first time there was ever something bad, I don't know, a school shooting or something, and some crazy person out there said, oh, they did that, the old copycat thing, right? I suspect that as a result, there's people in Ukraine sitting around saying, what happened to my son? Sons of bitches. I got an idea. Perhaps in Ukraine, there could begin to be copycats who say, as you said, the press gang, some right-wing politician, whatever the case may be.
Lots of aggrieved families out there.
I guarantee you this: there's a whole lot of those Banderites in high places that are starting to look over their shoulders. That are walking real softly, looking around for some guy with a motorcycle helmet on, pretending to be a courier or saying. So we'll see what happens.
He was shot outside of his residence, right? On the street. The guy was he dressed himself up as a food delivery courier. Shot him in the back 8 times. He made sure that SOB was dead.
No guesswork there. There will be no grazing wounds across the shoulders. Nope. He's going to, make sure the job is done. Well, that's, at least we got something positive to talk about today for all of the unfortunate things. Let's talk about the Ukraine battlefront. We're always, I found out that the RIA Novostia News had like
Novosti. Novosti means news. Actually.
Oh, okay. They had had a quote from me. Some people in Russia where from one of my YouTube shows where I said, every time I get up and check the news, another town that I can't pronounce in Ukraine has, some Russian guy walking down the middle of the street planting a flag, right? And they actually, kind of quoted that or whatever. But at any rate, There's more towns that I can't pronounce. There's more flags being planted. There's more people on the outskirts of the town. You know, first I hear they're on the outskirts of the town. They're on the suburbs. They're in the town. There's attacks being launched. Oh, they must be in the town because there was an attack. It seems like that's going on. What's happening what's interesting is this group of towns, right? This group of cities, small cities, towns, etc. Kind of reminds me of Pennsylvania, actually. But these intermediate sized towns, you know, that you go through that are all over the place, have been like the most fortified, dug in, entrenched place on earth. And bit by bit, it's being picked apart. And the Russians are taking this thing down bit by bit, slowly but surely. What's happening? What's the state of affairs in this entrenched group of towns these days, Mark?
Yeah, I'm actually originally from Pennsylvania, by the way.
So you know what I mean.
Lancaster, as we like to call it, bumfuck coal country, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Pennsylvania. Yes, you got York, Lancaster, Harrisburg, Reading. You know, they're all these intermediate sites all over creation. They're everywhere. They're pretty cool, though. I like that area. I like Pennsylvania.
To each their own.
Yeah, especially Lancaster, man. I like the Amish country. Go there to the all-you-can-eat restaurants in the Amish country. That's good eating, brother. That's good eating. Anyway.
Yeah. So, yeah, right now, I mean, on average, Russia's taking 6 or 7 settlements a week, right? You know, of varying sizes. But right now, the Kiev regime attempted about 2 weeks of counterattacks, which have all been absorbed and blunted and reversed at this point. And right now, there's several key cities that Russia is they're fighting inside the city now, right? So it's no longer on the outskirts. They're fighting in the city, and these are all in Donbass and southern Kharkov. And the first one, of course, is Pokrovsk. That's probably the most important. Then Konstantinovka, you know, the bottom of this last defensive line, which is, you know, really just to the north of Pokrovsk. Seversk, which is the Kiev regime's northern stronghold in the Donbass region. North of on the outskirts of Seversk, there's this Serebranskaya forest where the Kiev regime has fought there. They've used forests, they've used the foliage as you know, operating area, you know, to hide from Russian artillery and drones and reconnaissance and everything very well since the beginning of this conflict. And that forest, I mean, if you take a look at the trench networks that were built in that forest, I showed a picture of it on my channel, and someone says, "Oh my God, that looks like an ant colony," right? How many fortifications and trenches and strongholds that were there. And Russia finally took it. And that is enabling them now to move in Seversk itself. So, then there is Kupiansk as well, which is to the north and a bit to the east of Slavyansk. The Kupiansk Liman and then Izyum will be the gateway to the north to Slavyansk. But there's fighting in Kupiansk as well. So all of these areas are, you know, they're on the edge, right? It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. And if a number of these fall in succession, that's going to really increase the panic in the West, because these are all heavily defended, right? You know, they can later claim, oh, it had no strategic significance because nothing Russia takes ever has strategic significance in the aftermath. But the Kiev regime is fighting tooth and nail, right? They're throwing everything they have left just to slow the Russian forces down in these areas. And Russia's still advancing, and there's a lot of fog of war right now because neither side is talking a lot, right? Kiev regime because everything looks bad, and the Russian side because they actually believe in operational discipline, right? You know, not blabbing when there's important military activities, operations going on. But here, I mean, if you take a look, fighting in Pokrovsk, fighting in Konstantinovka, fighting in Seversk, and fighting in Kupiansk, right? These are all, really the last real defensive line for the Kiev regime. After those, you've got Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, but that will almost be an afternote then, because Russia will have taken all of these high grounds and all of these other things. We've seen Chasiv Yar fall under Russian control, and Toretsk and Ugledar and Avdeevka in the last year. Well, these will be the Soledar as well, even before that, right north of Bakhmut. That these will be, once these are taken, it's all downhill, right? It's all downhill for the rest of the Donbass. It literally, because a lot of these places will literally give the high ground, more high ground, looking down on Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, which will be the last holdouts once these are taken. So, and again, to a lot of people, it seems like this is taking a long time, but it's actually happening much faster than it did before. The Kiev regime is much less able to resist. They weren't able to launch any offensive this summer, right? No repeat of Kursk. They tried some small scale things towards Bryansk and some other places, but they simply weren't capable. And they attempted counterattacks around Pokrovsk and other areas, and they were just blunted. They were blunted, absorbed, and reversed. So they're not even capable of that in any significant way right now. So I mean Zelensky is, all his Baghdad Bob denials and everything, but if you actually listen on the Ukrainian Telegram channels, if you listen to what their commanders are saying, they're all like, it's in crisis, it's catastrophe, you need to let us retreat to save our men's lives. There's no way we can hold this position. And Zelensky and Sersky keep saying, no, fight to the death. I mean,
now, are there supplies coming from Kharkov?
Are there supplies coming from Kharkov? Sure. Yeah. Are they getting through to any of these places now? No. Right? Because, Kharkov is not as important for supply routes as Dnipropetrovsk is, right? Mm-hmm. Dnipropetrovsk, there's more supplies. That's more important for supplies than Kharkov, which is not to say that no supplies are coming from the north as well, but the big supply routes. And taking Pokrovsk is going to interrupt it's already interrupted, its use as a logistics center and everything. But it's once Pokrovsk falls, that then presents a threat to anything coming from the Dnieper east. So it will be a huge hurdle for the Kiev regime to continue to get supplies to places like Slavyansk and Kramatorsk after that. Right? Not impossible, but they'll have to go the long way around, and then of course they'll be more and more vulnerable. And once Pokrovsk falls as well, it not only opens up, the move on these last remaining holdouts in the Donbass region, but it also opens up all that territory to the west, all the way to the Dnieper River, right? Because there's no significant defenses past Pokrovsk either. And south of Pokrovsk, the Russian forces are already advancing into the Dnipropetrovsk region, and this will just widen that thrust into the Dnipropetrovsk region and eventually towards the city of Dnipropetrovsk, or as it is on your map there, that's using Ukrainian terminology, Dnipro.
Okay. And now what's going on between, say, Mariupol, Melitopol, Zaporizhzhia, Dnipro, that area?
Yeah. So Russia is making an offensive thrust right now. They're effectively have under siege the Ukrainian small city town of Orehov, right? And if you'll remember, when the Kiev regime launched its failed...
That'd be right here, right?
Yeah, 2023 summer offensive, that's it. Arehov is where they launched it out of. Well,
Okay.
Russia has reversed all their paltry gains, and they're pushing hard on Arehov now. They've essentially got the city under siege. They're coming from multiple directions on Arehov, and once Arehov falls, that just opens up the door to Zaporizhzhia city. You can see that right up the road there.
Are any of those other towns like are they heavily fortified? Or are they much less fortified? Or
Much less. I mean, everything is fortified, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's the reality, but nothing like Arehov. No. There's nothing. Once Arehov falls, then everything else will just be a hop, a skip, and a jump into the Zaporizhzhia suburbs.
And that also gives them, I mean, if they're heading towards Zaporozhye, anything coming from, I mean, that gives them the opportunity to kind of like between Zaporozhye and say Pavlograd and all of that, it's stuff
Yeah.
that travels through there from say Zaporozhye to Dnipro, anywhere they want to be inside of that whole open area, which is flat land, right?
Yeah. See, this is a big difference is the topography is once you get past Pokrovsk, right? Everything to the west of that is steppe. It's not like the territory in the Donbass, which is hilly and forested, and there's these tight urban agglomerations of small towns and small cities and mines and factories that make excellent fortifications. Everything past Pokrovsk is just tiny little villages sparsed out over steppe. That's really bad defending terrain, right? For Russia that has air superiority and artillery and everything else, that just becomes Russia past Pokrovsk until they reach the outskirts of cities like Pavlograd and Dnipro and Zaporozhye. Russia will be held up more by just maintaining their logistics than they will be by any effective resistance to the west of there. That's why they're making this do or die, all or nothing, no retreat stand in the last remaining areas of the Donbass, because after that it's just much less defendable, and they don't have the built up fortification. I mean, not only is the terrain bad, but they haven't built up fortifications like they did for a decade in the Donbass region when they were, the civil war was going on in the Donbass, before Russia intervened. So it's going to be a very different, the West, always, Russian forces, they're so bad, they're struggling, they're not even capable of maneuver warfare. Well, modern warfare, with drones and 24/7 satellite and drone reconnaissance and everything, that makes maneuver warfare if you don't have complete, overwhelming air superiority. It makes it impossible, right? But once Russia gets past Pokrovsk, then you're going to see things that look a lot more like maneuver warfare, simply because there won't be the heavily defended urban agglomerations. It will be open, flat territory, and like I said, Russian logistics are going to be the biggest problem for Russian advances, rather than organized resistance, at least up until the banks of the Dnieper River.
Okay, got it. Yeah, yes. Once they get past the areas where people are in the highly populated areas or what have you, they got open ground for a long while. And then you can use tanks and all those kind of things. And again, as you said, your air superiority, where there are things, you can pick them off because they're kind of sitting out in the open. And that's nowhere you want to be in the military. They can drop the big bombs on them, the Fab 3000s.
The Fabs, yes. It has to be said, for about the last 6 months, really, Russia has not been using a lot of armor and armored vehicles.
Right.
They've been building them up. I mean, they're stockpiling at this point because the drone war on both sides, right? Even the Ukrainians admit that Russia has the advantage in the drone warfare now, qualitatively, but they're, the drone war is still significant on the Ukrainian side. They're the number one cause of Russian casualties is FPV drones, right? And it's just not cost effective. It's not strategic to use these armored vehicles, particularly where they have the urban facilities to set up kill zones with large numbers of drones. So they're basically using their own drones, and they're using the standoff strikes, like you said, with the FABs and long range strikes. Trying to take out the drone headquarters. Forward of their positions, but they're not wasting the tanks and the armored fighting vehicles. They're advancing. The Kiev regime was complaining about it, that Russia's infiltrating their lines because they don't have enough manpower to defend everywhere. And small groups of Russians are infiltrating through the lines, 2-3 people. And then on the other side, they're starting to then agglomerate together and forming critical masses on the other side of the Kiev regime's defensive line. It's actually what, in the latter days, I don't know why they're complaining about this, because it's the same strategy they were using or trying to use in the latter days of their failed 2023 summer offensive in the south, in the Zaporizhzhia region. First, they tried these Western Jedi combined arms maneuver, big blitzkrieg rushes, and they didn't work right through the Russian defenses. Then they tried these trickle tactics, these infiltrations. The problem was that Russia had too many people, too good of defenses and too many people to man them. The Kiev regime, on this hand, doesn't have good defenses, and they don't have the people to man what they do have. And that's why Russia is able to infiltrate through the lines and then build up critical masses on the other side, and then everything just falls apart. And they've done that repeatedly. And that's not according to me. That's according to Ukrainian commanders on the ground, talking on their own social media channels, a lot of which the Western media just chooses not to report for some reason. I don't know why.
What's all this business about? They've got, the U.S. is going to send them 3,000 missiles, and then we find out that they really don't exist, and they're really just bombs that they like strapped on, try to attach something to or whatever. They're like powered bombs in a nutshell that haven't really happened yet. And now they're once again showing us some pictures that we saw a month or two ago about some so-called deep strike missiles that they have. And there's all of this business going on about these great capabilities that are being bestowed upon the mighty Ukrainian military.
Yeah, a lot of this is, I think it's, bluffing from a bad hand, shall we say, right? Which Russia isn't buying. Yeah, so there was the announcement a couple of weeks ago. I did a report on this too, that the U.S. was transferring 3,500 ERAM cruise missiles, quote unquote, to the Kiev regime. And I'm like, what's an ERAM cruise missile? I've never even heard of that before, and I pay attention to this stuff, right? So it turns out it's a program that the U.S. Air Force and the Navy, to some extent, has been working on for a number of years. And then a decision was made about a year ago to specifically create a variant of this research and development project specifically for the Kiev regime. Right. And it's extended range missiles. Right. That's the idea. They're essentially supposed to be a poor man's cruise missile that is somewhere in between a hybrid between a cruise missile and a glide bomb. And it's not clear. They announced this big delivery that it was all going to start to take place in 6 weeks. And then there's open questions. How many of them do they actually have made? And that's not been answered yet, right? And I think the consensus that's come out now is either that this is definitely a long range contact, right? They're not suddenly going to get 3,500 of them. It's not even clear in 6 weeks how any they're going to get, If so, the numbers are going to be extremely small, I think. Also, the range on them, I mean, it's enough to get deeper behind Russian lines, right? A couple 100 miles, 250 miles, something like that, at least on, from the stats we've been given, but not enough to reach Moscow or St. Petersburg or something like that. And whatever they may say, Russian air defense and electronic warfare has already taken out some of the West's best missiles, the Storm Shadow, the Scalp, right? These are supposed to be stealthy missiles and everything. The ATACMS, right? Russian electronic warfare nullified them. They gave up on using them. So whether we're talking this ERAM or this supposed new Kiev regime cruise missile, the Flamingo, what a ridiculous name. I think it's more like an albatross, right? In the analogous sense of the word. It appears that it's really a British Emirati old cruise missile type that they're basically going to have a Flamingo made in Ukraine stamp thrown on it. But it's also it's old, it's slow. It's big, but it's very slow moving. Russian air defenses and electronic warfare. We'll just do a number on this thing.
The clay, what do we call it? The clay pigeon?
Yeah. They'll get their licks in, especially when they're first used. But, with Russian electronic warfare and air defense, it's like the Borg in Star Trek, right? You get 3 shots, and by then, they're shields have adapted, right, and it's just useless. And that we've seen that repeatedly with the Western Wunderwaffen. Why don't you hear about the Bayraktar anymore? Why don't you hear about the Storm Shadows or the Scalps or the ATACMS? Because Russia nullified all of them, and they're just not effective by and large anymore, right? If Russia shoots down 7 or 8 out of 10 of them, then they're not effective. And I do not expect any missile provision here of anything they're talking, even if they exist in whatever numbers they do exist, whether we're talking the ERAM or the Flamingo or anything else. It's from the Russian Ministry of Defense perspective, their collective response is call exactly. Calling the bluff, right? Yeah, that's what they're saying right now. If they do exist and what numbers, and their effectiveness will not change anything significantly, nothing operationally with this. They haven't with the ATACMS and the Storm Shadow and the Scalp and everything before that, and they certainly won't with this either.
Well, I think we have some good news for Europe, some really, really good news for the EU. They've been talking about, abandoning that stinky old evil Russian energy. And it looks as though they will get their wish, that Russia has been turning to the east. And it looks like they got plans to go through Mongolia, and that they're going to have strong customers and a people that, heaven knows, probably won't blow up their own pipelines or back out of the deals once they sign them. Yeah.
So there was this big Shanghai Cooperation Organization presidential summit in China that was dovetailed in with their 80th anniversary of victory over Japan and every big meetings and festivities. And this meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, big geopolitical visuals, right? Modi, like literally taking the hands and holding the hands of Putin and Xi Jinping, and then Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping and Putin as well, right? Big, the Western media, which had ignored BRICS and SCO summits for years, suddenly wasn't ignoring them anymore. And they really started ringing the panic and like, well, what do we do if Russia, China, and India all ally against us? Well, maybe you shouldn't have pushed us all together repeatedly for the last decade, and now India as well, with Trump's ridiculous tariffs on them. So your hubris has led exactly to that. But there were 2 besides all the the geopolitical symbolism and visuals, there was two concrete things that came out of this summit, and that's what I always look for, right? The rest, yeah, PR, talking shops, good visuals, aspirations. I look for the concrete things, right? The first one was the announcement of a new SCO development bank that will be parallel to the new development bank in the BRICS. And banks, a lot of people, oh, banks are boring. What is it? It's not as excitement as a military conflict or anything. But the truth is, money makes the world go around, right? And the IMF and the World Bank are incredibly important institutions for global trade. And if you're going to build an alternate financial architecture, an alternate trade work that goes outside of the Western controlled ones, then you need these big development banks. And this will be parallel to the new development bank in BRICS, much like the IMF and the World Bank are kind of parallel, overlapping with each other in some way. So I think that was real significant. The other one, big development, was not a joint SCO thing, but it was a bilateral deal struck between the Russian gas company Gazprom and the Chinese National Petroleum Company. And this is the Power of Siberia gas pipeline 2, right? Because the first one already exists. And this has been in the works for a decade. They've been wrangling about this and discussing it and the terms and everything. And the deal was finally sealed. And while the first Power of Siberia gets its gas from eastern Siberia, right, and then runs down into China, this one gets the gas fields are from the Yamal Peninsula in western Siberia. And this is the gas fields that previously the gas going to Europe had been drawn from. So that gas is now being sent to China. And that's we're not going back. There's no return to normal business. You can buy whatever expensive American and Qatari LNG you can bid on the markets in the future, but you're going to be paying 3-4 times as much for that. Your economies were already uncompetitive. Now, not only are you paying more for energy, but China is going to be paying less for energy, which is going to make them even more economically competitive, right, for export than they are now. This is the economic, you could say nail in the coffin on the European economies. I think it's more like, the coffin's already sealed. It's just kicking dirt on the coffin now, right? You're standing on the top of the grave and you're just looking down and hawking a loogie and talking some dirt down on the coffin. That's more like what it is. But yeah, there's no going back from this. So this is incredibly important. It will further cement Russia and China together, right? It provides China energy security for their growth and development, that they'll no longer be vulnerable through maritime interdiction, through the Straits of Malacca, through any quad naval games of the US or anything. And for Russia, they have a reliable consumer that they don't have to worry about, but we dictate these political terms and you have to allow us to support this opposition in your country and all of this other nonsense that they've been doing for years. This should have been done a long time ago. I'm glad it's done now. And Eurasia is becoming more and more connected together. I always say that pipelines, whether we're talking oil or gas, are geopolitics in solid form, right? These are connections that bind countries together. That's why the US went to the extent of physically blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines to finally sever, right, Europe from Russia and to give no option to go back, right? Well, now not only is Nord Stream destroyed, but they've built the pipeline. They're building the pipelines. It'll take a few years in the other direction. And what's more, they're talking about already about once this is built, then expanding capacity on both of them and effectively turning China into an energy hub, then to provide gas to Eastern Asia, right? To possibly up to the Koreas, down to Southeast Asia, maybe even eventually around the coast down to India, right? Which is a lot better than trying to build pipelines through the Himalayas, right? There's lots of options for growth there, and that will further cement Eurasia together physically, like this SCO summit was doing it politically and rhetorically.
It's a physical metaphor, kind of like your brain. You know, when you first learn cup and spoon, or cup and saucer, and then you see cup and saucer, and your brain starts to build a physical connection between the two. So when you see a cup, it's no longer thinking cup and saucer. There's a physical connection. Cup and saucer becomes one. It's kind of the manifestation of that between two countries. You can talk about, hey, we've got a partnership that has no limits, it's strong, and you discuss the partnership. Once you put physical connections to the partnership, and once I supply you gas, you process the gas, you use the gas, you sell some of the gas. Now this guy, you become the Russian and Chinese economy physically become one unit, seamless unit that works together. And I tell you why that's good. Because in knowing Russians like I do, and knowing some Russians, there are still people who have in Russia who they don't trust China. You know what I mean? We're going to get close with, they're going to stab us in the back, and they're going to, right? There's certainly that. I think it helps to alleviate that. It helps to work past that, because now it's, hey, look, our economy is part of the Chinese economy and vice versa. And sadly speaking, in a twisted, in their own demented kind of way, the neocons were right in blowing up Nord Stream from their twisted and evil way, because that's what was going on with Russia and Germany. Germany was greatly benefiting, but the more they benefited, the more of a partnership with Russia became real to them. And the longer they left that, the more it was like
influence both ways.
Yeah. And so in their own twisted way, they were right. If you see the world, like we got to dominate Russia. We got to dominate
maybe at the end game, it's good that they did it, right? you could also argue that.
That's the other part of it, because now seeing who the Germans, now that the Germans are revealing themselves to be effectively the Andre, what's his name? Parubi?
Parubi's,
They're the Parubis of the world. Maybe you'd be better off if you cut the damn pipeline yourselves.
Okay, so you're talking spoons and cups, all right? Well, here's the really important question, Garland. If you're eating a piece of cake or pie, do you use a fork or a spoon?
Fork.
See, I'm a spoon guy. I'm a spoon guy. I'll disagree with you on mechanical terms there.
Well, here's the thing about it. I will say this, because this is what I thought about when you said that. If it's a piece of cake, it's probably going to be a fork. But you know how the pies, you get an apple pie and the inside's kind of hot and runny, or any cherry pie. If the inside is kind of hot and runny, then I'm going to use a spoon. If it's just the bready kind of stuff like cake, or let's say a solid pie such as pumpkin, which I don't really like, I prefer sweet potato pie, now I'm going to go with a fork. So I'll say this, depending upon the circumstances, it's most likely a fork, but there are circumstances when I'll go spoon. Now, since they don't make metal sporks, only if I'm at a place that has sporks, which kind of freak me out anyway.
I have sporks.
Either. You have actual sporks in your home?
I have silver sporks in my cabinet at home. Yep.
You know what? Now that you've told me that you can buy silver sporks, this is sad. I'm going to go on Amazon to find. I love those things, but they're plastic, and I hate plastic utensils. You're trying to cut up an omelet with a plastic fork. It's terrible. Anyway, Mark, let's get back to the important stuff. If I can ever get back, for God's sake, it was, I don't know why, the last time I tried to get Boosty, I think the CIA was cutting me out. But there we go. I think we have gotten around their work, and there we go. Mark, Boosty.to/the real politique. We're at 183 subscribers. Come on, gang. We are working towards 200. Once again, for the newbies who didn't hear, what good things can they find out, and what can they do on Boosty.to? Mark Sleboda.
Yeah, subscribers, it's a sanctions-proof Patreon, so you can actually support me. Also, lots of exclusive content, several hours of exclusive content there every week. An in-focus video, weekly Q&A where I answer your questions, and a week in review. And you can also join our Discord community, where we discuss and debate these things and have all kinds of flame wars and everything like that. You can even get one-on-one interviews with me and everything else there. So, follow me there. And for God's sakes, buy this man a coffee. You can buy him a coffee, and he looks like he could use a coffee.
Yes, I could. Thank you very much. All right, everybody. Thanks a lot. That's Mark Sleboda. Follow him and all of his good works. Wait a minute before we go. Mark Sleboda. Use that stuff. And a word from Keir Starmer. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.